In the village of Zango, there was a woman named Salima. She was as poor as the dusty ground beneath her feet. Her clothes were like old rags, full of holes and tears, barely covering her body. Her heart was more of a shell than a home. The roof leaked whenever the sky cried, and the cold wind blew through the torn windows as if mocking her. Salah had no bed. She slept on the hard, bare floor, curling up like a hungry cat to keep warm. Every night, she prayed for a better life, but the mornings always greeted her with the same struggle. She tried everything to survive, fetching water for people, washing their clothes, and even working on their farms, but no matter how hard she worked, her hands always came back empty. It was as if the world had turned its back on her. Her age mates, the women she grew up with, were all married, living comfortably with their families. They wore fine clothes, their children laughing and playing around them. But Salah had no husband, no child, no one to call her own. The villagers whispered behind her back. "She's cursed," they said. "Born with bad luck." Even the men kept their distance, fearing her misfortune would rub off on them. Salima's life was a tale of sorrow. She walked through the village like a shadow, unnoticed, unloved, and unwanted. Yet, despite everything, she carried on, hoping that one day the sun would shine brighter on her life. But that day had not come. Not yet. One hot afternoon, Salima carried her bundle of tattered clothes to the river. The sun beat down fiercely, and the river sparkled like a pot of melted silver. She knelt by the water, scrubbing her rags with hands as rough as the village roads. The sound of the rushing water was the only comfort she had. As Salima washed, she heard the soft rustle of footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, her heart skipping like a frightened bird. There, standing tall and proud, was a woman dressed in clothes so fine they seemed to belong to a queen. Her skin glowed, her jewelry sparkled, and her smile was as sharp as a knife. "Good day," the woman said, her voice smooth like honey. Salima blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. "Good day, ma," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman stepped closer. "My name is Kemi. I've been watching you, Salah. I know your struggles." Salima's eyes widened. How did this stranger know her name? Kemi smiled, as if reading her thoughts. "I have a business for you. It's simple and will change your life." Salima stared, her mind spinning. What kind of business? Kemi reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of crisp notes. "You will collect used panties from the villagers. Bring as many as you can. For every load, I will pay you handsomely." Salima's jaw dropped. "Panties?" she asked, confusion thick in her voice. "Yes," Kemi said firmly. "Don't ask questions. Just do as I say, and you'll never be poor again." With that, she handed Salah the money and turned to leave. "Remember," she said, "I'll be waiting." Salah sat by the river, clutching the money, her mind clouded with questions. What kind of business was this? Why panties? She didn't understand, but the weight of the money in her hand was real. And for the first time in her life, hope stirred in her chest. She packed her clothes and headed home, her heart beating like a talking drum. What would she do next? The next morning, Salah woke up with a plan. She knew the villagers might grow suspicious if she asked for only panties, so she decided to make her trade seem ordinary. With the money Kemi had given her, Salima went to the market and bought colorful buckets and bowls, big and small, each one shining under the morning sun. When she returned to the village, she knocked on the first door. An old woman opened it, her eyes narrowing at Salima. "Good morning, Mama," Salima greeted, holding up a bright blue bucket. "I'm exchanging this for any old clothes, shoes, or even panties you don't need." The old woman grunted. "Old clothes. Shoes. Panties." She shook her head. What kind of business is that? It's for a new venture, Solimo said, her voice steady. If you have anything you're not using, I'll trade you for this fine bucket. The old woman's eyes lit up at the sight of the bucket. Without hesitation, she went inside and returned with a pile of old clothes and shoes, topped with a few worn-out panties. Sola smiled. Thank you, Mama. Here's your bucket. At each house, it was the same. The villagers eagerly handed over their useless items for Sola's shiny bowls and buckets. By the end of the day, her sack was full, bulging with clothes, shoes, and, most importantly, panties. That night, Sola sat in her hut, sorting through her collection. She carefully separated the panties and placed them in a special sack. The other clothes and shoes, she took them outside and burned them in a hidden spot near the river. The flames crackled, eating up the evidence while Sola watched, her face glowing in the firelight. The next day, she delivered the sack of panties to Kemi by the river. You've done well, Kemi said, her voice smooth as silk. She handed Solimo a thick bundle of money. Solimo's heart raced as she clutched the payment. Thank you, she whispered, feeling hope rise in her chest. Kemi smiled, her eyes sharp. Keep walking, Sola. Your life is about to change. And so, Solimo's trade continued, each day bringing her closer to a life she never thought possible, while the villagers remained clueless about the dark secret hidden beneath her newfound success. Before long, the news of Solimo's trade spread through Zango like wildfire. Her colorful buckets and shiny bowls became the talk of the village. From the eldest grandmothers to the youngest brides, everyone was eager to exchange their old clothes, shoes, and, most of all, panties for Sola's fine goods. Have you seen Sola's new bowls? One woman asked her neighbor. Yes. I traded my husband's old shirts yesterday and got one. It's beautiful, the neighbor replied, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Whenever Sola arrived in the village with her buckets, a crowd would gather instantly. Women pushed and shoved, each trying to hand over their old items first. Sola never lacked customers, and her sacks were always full by the end of the day. With Kemi's payments coming in regularly, Solimo's life began to change. She repaired her leaky hut, replacing the torn roof with sturdy palm leaves. Her windows were covered, keeping the cold winds out at night. She even bought new clothes, bright and colorful like the women she once envied. For the first time, Solimo could eat well. No more begging or struggling. Her days of hunger were over. But while her days were filled with laughter and trade, her nights held a darker secret. Every night, while the village slept, Sola would quietly gather her sacks of sorted panties. Like a shadow, she slipped through the narrow paths, heading toward the river. Under the moonlight, Kemi would be waiting with her strange, knowing smile. They exchanged no more than a few words, but each time, Kemi would take the sack of panties and hand Sola her payment. No one in the village knew of these nightly meetings. To them, Solimo's success was a simple tale of hard work. But in the dark, by the river, something strange and unspoken was happening. And soon, it would catch the attention of a watchful eye. The elders looked before the crowd, their expressions grim. Sola, the head elder, began. Your neighbor, Tinu, has brought a troubling report. She says she followed you to the river last night and saw things that concern the safety of this village. We demand an explanation. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on Sola. The air was thick with tension, and even the smallest breeze seemed to carry whispers of fear. Solimo stood in the center of the village square, her legs shaking like leaves in the wind. The villagers' eyes bore into her, their faces a mix of fear and anger. She swallowed hard, but her throat felt as dry as the harmattan wind. Solimo, the head elder said again, his voice sharp. Speak. What are you hiding? Solimo looked down, her hands clutched tightly together. I can't, she whispered. I took an oath. If I speak, I will run mad or die. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers rose like the hum of bees. An oath. What kind of oath? The head elder frowned and turned to one of the younger men. Bring the chief priest, he ordered. The villagers waited in tense silence until the chief priest arrived, his long staff tapping against the ground with each step. His sharp, knowing eyes scanned the crowd before settling on Solomon. You've taken an oath, the priest said, his voice deep and commanding. Solomon nodded, tears streaming down her face. The priest raised his staff and began to chant, his voice rising and falling like the waves of a river. The air grew heavy, and a strange stillness settled over the square. The villagers watched in awe as the priest's chants seemed to wrap around Solomon like an invisible rope. Finally, the priest stopped and pointed his staff at her. Speak, he said. The spirit will protect you. Solomon fell to her knees, her body trembling. It's Kai, she sobbed. She's not an ordinary woman. She's a ritualist. She forced me to collect your panties to steal your lives. The villagers gasped in horror. Our lives, someone shouted. Solomon nodded, her tears falling freely. Yes. She told me she would make me rich if I helped her. Every time I bring her panties, she performs rituals. She uses them to take your strength, your fortune, your very souls to grow her wealth. The villagers stared in stunned silence, their faces pale. I had no choice. Solomon cried. She said if I didn't take the oath and obey her, she would kill me. I was desperate. I'm sorry. The head elder's face hardened. He turned to the chief priest. What can we do? The priest stroked his beard thoughtfully. We must find Kai and destroy her power. Only then can we break her hold on the village. The crowd erupted in a mix of fear and anger. The once celebrated trade of buckets and bowls had turned into a dark tale of deceit and danger. Now, they knew the true cost of their old, discarded clothes. The chief priest stood tall, his staff planted firmly in the ground. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, swept over the gathered villagers. The square was so silent that even the rustling leaves seemed afraid to make a sound. This is no ordinary matter, the priest said, his voice echoing. A powerful witch hides among us, feeding on your lives through the work of Kai. But fear not. The spirits have spoken, and they will guide us to break this curse. The villagers shifted nervously. Some clutched their children. Others murmured prayers under their breath. Now, the priest continued, if you have ever given your panties to Solomon, step forward. The curse cannot be lifted if you hide. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, women began to step forward, their faces pale with fear. One by one, they stood before the priest, their heads bowed in shame and terror. Me too, whispered an elderly woman as she joined the line. I gave 3 pairs, admitted a young mother, clutching her baby tightly. Soon, more women came forward until nearly half the village stood before the priest. The men watched in stunned silence, their faces reflecting a mix of anger and fear. The priest raised his staff, drawing a circle in the dirt around the gathered women. He began to chant, his voice deep and rhythmic, each word carrying the weight of ancient power. The air grew heavy, and the villagers felt a strange pull, as if the very ground beneath them was alive. He called upon the spirits of the land, the river, and the skies. The flames of the ceremonial torches flickered wildly, and a cool wind swept through the square. The villagers shivered, though the night was warm. As the chants grew louder, the women inside the circle began to sway, their eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the priest's voice rose sharply, and the circle of dirt around them lit up with a faint, eerie glow. The curse is breaking, the priest declared. But it will not fully lift until Kai's power is destroyed. The villagers murmured in awe, but their fear remained. They knew that the battle was not over. Kai, the witch behind it all, still lurked somewhere in the shadows, her dark power threatening them all. The villagers stormed Kai's lair, breaking her spells, and ended her reign of terror. The village was finally free, but not without scars. Tinu, the brave girl who exposed the truth, lost her sight but was later healed by the priest's rituals. Salima, however, was not so fortunate. Her legs remained weak, and the weight of guilt grew unbearable. Unable to stay, Salima left Sango, limping down the dusty road with only a small bundle. The villagers watched her go, their faces a mix of relief and sadness. Her name became a lesson, a warning of what could happen when desperation meets deceit. Tinu, however, stayed and was celebrated. The villagers saw her as a hero. The king's son took her as his wife, and the village rejoiced. Her courage had saved them all, and she became a symbol of strength and resilience. The story of Solomon and the stolen panties became legend. Around fires and under moonlit skies, elders told the tale to children, warning them of the dangers of greed and hidden evil. Remember, they'd say, evil often comes in the guise of opportunity. Though Zango returned to peace, the memory of those dark days lingered. The villagers stayed wary of strange traits and mysterious figures. Salima's name lived on, not as a curse, but as a reminder of lessons learned. And so, the tale of the woman who traded panties for riches became woven into the very fabric of Zango, passed down through generations, ensuring the village never forgot the cost of their trust.